MLC 2006 ILO Maritime Labour Convention 2006. The MLC 2006 Convention comprises of three different and related parts: the Articles, the Regulations and the Code. Regulations and Code are organized into general areas under 5 titles. Note: includes MLC 2006 amendments of 2014, in force, 2016, in force, 2018, in force. Title 1, Minimum Requirements for Seafarers to Work on a Ship. Title 2, Conditions of Employment. Title 3, Accommodation, Recreational Facilities, Food and Catering. Title 4, Health Protection, Medical Care, Welfare and Social Security Protection. Title 5, Compliance and Enforcement. Title 1, Minimum Requirements for Seafarers to Work on a Ship. Times Regulation 1.1, Minimum Age. Times Regulation 1.2, Medical Certificate. Times Regulation 1.3, Training and Qualifications. Times Regulation 1.4, Recruitment and Placement. Title 2, Conditions of Employment. Times Regulation 2.1, Seafarers Employment Agreements. Times Regulation 2.2, Wages. Times Regulation 2.3, Hours of Work and Hours of Rest. Times Regulation 2.4, Entitlement to Leave. Times Regulation 2.5, Repatriation. Times Regulation 2.6, Seafarer Compensation for the ship's loss or foundering. Times Regulation 2.7, Manning Levels. Times Regulation 2.8, Career and Skill Development and Opportunities for Seafarers' Employment. Title 3, Accommodation, Recreational Facilities, Food and Catering. Times Regulation 3.1, Accommodation and Recreational Facilities. Times Regulation 3.2, Food and Catering. Title 4, Health Protection, Medical Care, Welfare and Social Security Protection. Times Regulation 4.1, Medical Care on Board Ship and Ashore. Times Regulation 4.2, Shipowners' Liability. Times Regulation 4.3, Health and Safety Protection and Accident Prevention. Times Regulation 4.4, Access to Shore-Based Welfare Facilities. Times Regulation 4.5, Social Security. Title 5, Compliance and Enforcement. Times Regulation 5.1, Flag State Responsibilities. Times Regulation 5.2, Port State Responsibilities. Times Regulation 5.3, Labor Supplying Responsibilities. Regulation 1.1, Minimum Age Requirements to Work on a Ship. Times Purpose, to ensure that no underage persons work on a ship. Times if you are under the age of 16 you cannot be employed to work on a ship. Times if you are under the age of 18 you cannot carry out night work on board a ship. The term night depends on national law and practice, but it must be a period of at least 9 hours, starting no later than midnight and ending no earlier than 5 a.m. Times exceptions can be made but only for specific, approved training programs where duties must be performed at night. Times if you are under the age of 18 you cannot be employed in work that would be likely to jeopardize your health and safety, and special attention should be given to the regulation of your working and living conditions. Times Regulation 1.2, Medical Certificate Requirements to Work on a Ship. Times Purpose, to ensure that all seafarers are medically fit to perform their duties at sea. Times you cannot work on board a ship unless you are certified medically fit for your duties. Times medical certificates must be issued by a qualified, Independent medical practitioner. In the event of a certificate being refused or restricted, you can seek a second opinion from another qualified, independent practitioner or referee. Times certificates must meet with accepted international standards, such as those issued to comply with the requirements of the International Convention on Standards of Training and Watchkeeping for Seafarers, STCW. It is recommended that they follow the ILO-WHO guidelines for conducting pre-sea and periodic medical fitness examinations for seafarers. They must cover hearing, sight and color vision, if it affects the seafarer's work. Times they must confirm that you are not suffering from any condition that would times be made worse by work at sea. Times make you unable to perform your job. Times make you a danger to others. Times medical certificates are valid for a period of 2 years, 1 year for seafarers under the age of 18. Color vision certificates are valid for 6 years. If you have a recently expired certificate, in urgent cases the competent authority may allow you to work until the next port of call as long as this does not exceed a period of 3 months. For international voyages, medical certificates must be in English. Times Regulation 1.3, Seafarer Training and Qualifications. Times Purpose: to ensure that seafarers are trained or qualified to carry out their duties on board ship. Times seafarers must be trained or certified as competent or otherwise qualified to perform their duties in accordance with flag state requirements. Times seafarers must have successfully completed training for personal safety on board ship. Times seafarers that are trained and certified in accordance with the mandatory instruments adopted by the IMO, STCW, are to be considered as meeting these requirements. Times Regulation 1.4, Seafarer Recruitment and Placement. Times Purpose: to ensure that seafarers have access to an efficient and well-regulated seafarer recruitment and placement system. Times Supervision and control of private seafarer recruitment and placement services to ensure that they are operated in accordance with these requirements. Times Prohibit services from using lists or other mechanisms, blacklisting. Times seafarers must not be charged for use of these services. Times seafarer recruitment and placement services must establish a system of protection by way of insurance or equivalent measures to compensate seafarers for monetary loss that they may incur as a result of the failure of the service or a shipowner. Times seafarer recruitment and placement services must make sure, as far as practicable, that the shipowner has the means to protect seafarers from being stranded in a foreign port. Times Regulation 2.1, Employment Agreement Requirements for Seafarers. Times Purpose: to ensure that seafarers have a fair employment agreement. Times you are entitled to a fair employment agreement or contract setting out decent living and working conditions on board. It must be signed by you and your employer, be easy to understand and legally enforceable. Times on the employer's side, it can be signed by the shipowner, the shipowner's representative, the ship manager, agent or bareboat charterer. If it is not the owner of the ship, it must be the organization or person that has taken over the duties and responsibilities for operating the ship. Times you must receive and keep a signed original of the agreement, a copy of which must also be available on board. Make sure you fully understand your rights and responsibilities. You have the right to seek advice before you sign. Times applicable CBAs are normally incorporated in the employment agreement. All information on the terms and conditions of employment, including the CBA, must be freely accessible to everyone on board and available for inspection in port. Times. In addition to the employment agreement, you must receive a record of your employment or discharge book. This will help you when seeking another job or making a case for promotion. This record must not include reference to performance or discipline issues. It is simply a document of your service. Times. Regulation 2.2 Seafarer Wage Requirements. Times. Purpose: to ensure that seafarers are paid for their services. Times. You have the right to be paid regularly and in full, at least monthly, and in accordance with your employment agreement or CBA. Times. Your employer must provide you with a monthly account setting out payments due and amounts paid, including wages, additional payments, and the rate of exchange if the currency is different from that set out in the employment agreement. Times. Basic pay or wages means pay for normal hours of work, normally no more than 8 hours a day and not more than 48 hours a week. Basic pay should never be less than the recommended minimum wage. Times. If you are a member of a trade union, your wage will often be negotiated between your employer and your trade union on your behalf. Times. The ILO sets a recommended minimum wage for able seafarers based on a formula that takes into consideration changes in the cost of living and exchange rates against the US dollar in a range of maritime countries. It is used as a reference by shipowners and trade unions when agreeing wage scales. Times. No seafarer should be paid at a rate below the recommended ILO minimum. Times. Overtime. If you are required to work more than your normal hours of work, you should get paid overtime. This should be covered by national law or your CBA, and the rate of pay should be at least 1 1/4 times the basic rate. In some agreements, the basic pay and overtime is consolidated into one sum, in which case the same principles should apply. Times. Overtime records should be kept by the captain and endorsed at least monthly by you. If you have to work on a day that is specified a day of rest or a public holiday either by national laws or the terms of your CBA, then you should be entitled to overtime payment or time off in lieu. Times. It is good practice to keep your own copy of overtime records in case of disagreement. Times. Your employer must ensure that you are able to send all or part of your earnings home. This could be by regular bank transfer of remittances agreed when you sign the contract. Remittances should be sent on time directly to the person or account nominated by you. You shouldn't be expected to pay unreasonable charges for such services. Times. Regulation 2.3 Hours of work and hours of rest for seafarers. Times. Purpose: to ensure that seafarers have regulated hours of work or hours of rest. Times. Hours of work and rest are regulated to avoid fatigue and to ensure that the ship is operated safely. Times. Normal working hours are based on an 8-hour day with 1 day of rest per week. Times. The flag state can decide whether to base the limits on maximum hours of work or minimum hours of rest. Times. In the event of an emergency where the safety of the ship and crew are in danger, or to give assistance to other ships or persons in distress at sea, the captain can suspend the work schedule until the problem is resolved. If normal working hours are disrupted by emergencies or unscheduled call-outs, you are entitled to an adequate compensatory rest period. Times. Musters and all other drills must take place with minimal disturbance to periods of rest. Times. All ships have to display a table with shipboard working arrangements in the working language of the ship and in English. It must include schedule of service at sea and service in port and maximum hours of work or minimum hours of rest required by law or by applicable CBAs. Times. Records must be kept of hours of work and hours of rest so that they can be checked to ensure compliance with the regulations. You must receive an endorsed copy of your hours or work rest. Times there are additional guidelines designed to ensure protection of young seafarers. You should not have to work for more than 8 hours a day and 40 hours per week. You should have enough time for meals, at least 1 hour for the main meal of the day and 15-minute breaks after every 2 hours, unless this interferes with agreed training programs. Times Regulation 2.4 Entitlement to leave for mariners. Times Purpose to ensure that seafarers have adequate leave. Times you are entitled to paid annual leave and shore leave for the benefit of your health and well-being. Times flag states have to determine minimum standards for annual leave, taking into account your special needs as a seafarer. Times the annual leave entitlement is calculated on the basis of 2.5 days for every calendar month of employment. Times justified absences from work, such as sickness or attendance at an approved training course, cannot be considered annual leave. It is forbidden to deny or buy off your entitlement to paid annual leave. Times the following should not be counted as annual leave: public and customary holidays, time off for illness, injury or maternity, temporary shore leave, and compensatory leave. Times you should have the right to take annual leave in your home country. You should not be required to take leave in a place where you have no substantial connection unless it is with your agreement. Times if you do have to take your leave from a different place, then you should be entitled to free transportation at the shipowner's expense to your place of recruitment as well as subsistence for the duration of the journey. The travel time should not be deducted from your paid annual leave. Times when you take your leave should be agreed between you and your employer. You should be able to take all your leave at once, but sometimes it may be divided into parts. Times Regulation 2.5 Seafarers' Repatriation Requirements. Times Purpose to ensure that seafarers are able to return home. Times you have a right to be repatriated at no cost to yourself under the following circumstances. Times your employment agreement expires while you are abroad. Times the shipowner terminates your contract. Times you terminate the contract for reasons that are justified. Times you are unable to carry out your duties under the agreement for reasons such as illness, injury, shipwreck, trading in a war zone, or if the shipowner fails to fulfill his/her legal obligations to you. Times the maximum period you can be expected to serve on board before being entitled to repatriation at the shipowner's expense is 12 months. Times shipowners are not allowed to ask you for a contribution, nor can they make a deduction from your wages towards the cost of repatriation, unless you have seriously breached the terms of your employment agreement. Times if the shipowner fails to pay for your repatriation, the flag state must take over this responsibility. If, for any reason, the flag state fails to do this, contact your consulate or diplomatic mission. They should be able to arrange your repatriation and claim the costs back from the flag state, who in turn can claim against the shipowner. The port state should also help you to find a way home. Times you should have the right to choose your preferred place of repatriation from the following options. Times the place where you agreed to join the ship. Times the place stated in a CBA. Times your country of residence. Times any other place agreed at the time of engagement. You should agree to whichever option you prefer at the time of engagement. Times if you are under 18, have served at least 4 months on your first foreign-going voyage, and find that you are not suited to a life at sea, you should be given the opportunity of repatriation, at no expense to yourself, from the next suitable port of call. Times Regulation 2.6 Seafarer compensation for the ship's loss or foundering. Times Purpose to ensure that seafarers are compensated when a ship is lost or has foundered. Times you are entitled to adequate compensation in case of injury, loss or unemployment due to the ship's loss or foundering. Times this should be paid to you by the shipowner, and shouldn't prevent you from asserting any other rights to claim you may have under relevant national law. Times for the period that you are unemployed, you should be paid the same amount as you would have received under your contract, but the total may be limited to 2 months' wages. Times Regulation 2.7, Seafarer Manning Levels. Times Purpose: to ensure that seafarers work on board ships with sufficient personnel for the safe, efficient and secure operation of the ship. Times you have a right to work on a safely and securely operated ship. There must be adequate crew on board, in terms of number and qualifications, to ensure the safety and security of the ship and all those on board under all operating conditions. Times the manning levels have to take into account the need to avoid excessive hours of work, ensure sufficient rest and limit fatigue. Times manning levels also have to take into account the nature and conditions of the voyage. Times there should be a complaints procedure in place to allow concerns to be raised with the flag state. Times Regulation 2.8, Seafarer Career and Skill Development Requirements. Times Purpose: to promote career and skill development and employment opportunities for seafarers. Times everyone concerned with the maritime industry has an interest in ensuring that the sector has a competent workforce. Times you should have the opportunity to strengthen your competencies, qualifications and employment opportunities. Times Regulation 3.1, Seafarer Accommodation and Recreational Facilities. Times Purpose: to ensure that seafarers have decent accommodation and recreational facilities on board. Times you are entitled to safe and decent living and recreational facilities on board. Times flag states have to pass laws and regulations obliging ships flying their flag to comply with a set of standards that must be inspected for compliance. Times inspections have to be carried out when a ship is registered, re-registered or when substantial structural changes are made to the accommodation on board. Times the laws and regulations on accommodation and recreational facilities must also take into account the Convention's requirements for health and safety protection and accident prevention. Times when setting standards, particular attention must be given to. Times the size of rooms and other accommodation spaces. Times heating and ventilation. Times noise, vibration and other ambient factors. Times sanitary facilities. Times lighting. Times hospital accommodation. Times Regulation 3.2, Seafarers' Food and Catering Requirements. Times Purpose: to ensure that seafarers have access to good quality food and drinking water provided under regulated hygienic conditions. Times ships must carry sufficient quantities of good quality food and drinking water and supply it free of charge during your period of engagement. Times food provided has to be nutritious and varied and prepared and served in hygienic conditions. Religious and cultural differences also have to be considered. Times frequent inspections have to be carried out and recorded by the captain or someone under his/her authority. The following has to be checked. Times supplies of food and drinking water. Times spaces and equipment used for storing and handling food and drinking water. Times galley and food preparation areas. Times ships cooks have to be over 18 and appropriately trained and qualified for the job. However, on ships with less than 10 crew or in exceptional cases for a period no longer than 1 month, the cook does not have to be fully qualified, but all those responsible for handling food, must be trained in matters relating to hygiene, food and its storage on board. Times MLC 2006 Regulation 4.1, Seafarers' Medical Care on Board Ship and Ashore Requirements. Times Purpose: to protect the health of seafarers and ensure their prompt access to medical care on board ship and ashore. Times whilst you are on board you must be able to protect your health and have prompt access to medical care, including dental care, should you need it. Times the flag state is responsible for standards of health protection on the vessel and for promoting health education programs on board. Times you should not be worse off than people working ashore. This means you should have prompt access to necessary medicines, medical equipment and facilities for diagnosis and treatment as well as medical information and expertise. Times all states that have signed the convention must give you access to medical care if you are in urgent need of it whilst in their territory. When in port you should be able to visit a doctor or dentist without delay. Times you should be able to get medical care and health protection free of charge, though the level of provision may vary according to national law. Times you should have access to times outpatient treatment for sickness and injury. Times hospitalization if necessary. Times facilities for dental treatment, especially in cases of emergency. Times hospitals and clinics for the treatment of disease. Times you should be admitted promptly regardless of nationality or religious belief and, where possible and necessary, you should receive continuing treatment. Times ships' captains and medical personnel on board and ashore must use a standard medical report form which must be kept confidential. Times on-board medical facilities. Times all ships have to have a medical chest, medical equipment and a medical guide on board. The contents of medical chests and the equipment on board should be determined by national medical guides taking into account the latest edition of the International Medical Guide for Ships. Inspections should be carried out at least every 12 months and should look at labeling, expiry dates, condition of storing medicine and the correct functioning of equipment. Times whenever dangerous goods are carried on board, you should be informed of all necessary information on the nature of the substances, including risks, necessary measures for personal protection, relevant medical procedures and antidotes. Any such antidotes should be carried on board along with protective devices. Times for ships carrying 100 or more people, on international voyages of more than 3 days, there must be a qualified medical doctor on board. National laws may require other ships to carry a doctor depending on the nature and conditions of the voyage. Times where there is no doctor on board, at least one seafarer must be in charge of medical care as part of their regular duties, or able to provide medical first aid. Appropriate training must be completed as specified in the STCW Convention. Training should be based on the contents of the following publications as well as any national guidance. Times International Medical Guide for Ships. Times Medical First Aid Guide for use in accidents involving dangerous goods. Times Document for Guidance, an International Maritime Training Guide. Times International Code of Signals, medical sections. Times normally seafarers with medical responsibilities should go on refresher courses every 5 years to maintain their knowledge and keep up to date with new developments. Times there must be arrangements for sending medical queries and receiving medical advice by radio or satellite communication 24 hours a day, free of charge. Ships should carry a complete, up-to-date list of radio stations and coast earth stations that can be contacted for the purpose. Times if you are the person responsible for medical care on board, you should have had Times instruction in the use of the ship's medical guide and the medical section of the most recent edition of the International Code of Signals. Times training in medical care and first aid in line with STCW and requirements and national laws, including practical training and training in life-saving techniques. Times you should be able to demonstrate that you can. Times provide satisfactory medical care to people who become sick or are injured during the period they are likely to remain on board. Times understand the type of information needed by an advising doctor as well as the advice received. Times Regulation 4.2 Ship Owners' Liability. Times Purpose to ensure that seafarers are protected from the financial consequences of sickness, injury or death occurring in connection with their employment. Times shipowners are responsible for any costs resulting from sickness, injury or death connected to your employment, from the date you start a contract until you have been repatriated, or can claim medical benefits under an insurance compensation scheme. This could be a state or private sickness accident insurance or a workers' compensation scheme. Times if you need medicine, medical treatment, or have to stay away from home while your condition is treated, the shipowner has to pay any bills until you have recovered or you have been signed off as permanently disabled. Times the shipowner's responsibility for paying these costs may be limited to 16 weeks from the day of injury sickness, if stated in national law regulation. Times if you are unable to work as a result of the injury illness you should get full wages so long as you are on board. When you get home national laws and CBAs apply which will determine whether you get full pay, part pay or a cash settlement. These payments may be limited to 16 weeks from the day of injury sickness. Times in the event of death or long-term disability due to an occupational illness or injury, shipowners must provide compensation as set out in national law, your employment agreement or your CBA. Shipowners are also liable for any burial expenses, whether on board or ashore, during the period of engagement. Times when is the shipowner not liable? Times if you were injured whilst not in the service of the ship. Times if you were injured or became sick as a result of willful misconduct. Times if you intentionally hid the fact you were sick when you were engaged. Times MLC 2006 Regulation 4.3 Health, Safety Protection and Accident Prevention Requirements. Times Purpose to ensure that seafarers' work environment on board ships promotes occupational safety and health. Times you are entitled to live and work in a safe and hygienic environment where a culture of safety and health is actively promoted. Times safety and health on board has to be regulated by the laws of the flag state, taking into account international standards. Times you have to have the following on board. Times a health policy and program, including risk evaluation and training. Times precautions to prevent accidents, injuries and the spread of disease, including the effects of handling chemicals and the use of machinery and equipment on board. Times involvement of seafarers' representatives in programs to improve occupational safety and health and accident prevention. Times a process for inspecting, reporting and correcting unsafe conditions and for investigating and reporting on-board accidents, ref. ILO, Accident Prevention on Board Ship at Sea and in Port, 1996. Times investigation and reporting must ensure that your personal data is protected. Times seafarers and shipowners have an obligation to comply with standards set for occupational safety and health on board. These must be clearly specified along with the duties of the captain or the person made responsible by the captain for safety and health on board. Your attention must be drawn to any safety regulation or procedures to be followed on board, and information should be clearly posted. There should also be ongoing publicity campaigns advising on health protection and accident prevention. Times there are international standards that set out requirements on acceptable levels of exposure to workplace hazards, as well as how to develop and put into practice ships' occupational safety and health policies. The MLC doesn't specify details. Instead, it sets out what matters have to be addressed in the flag state regulations. It is the shipowner's responsibility to put them into practice. Times young seafarers should not be expected to carry out high-risk work without supervision, or night work unless for training purposes. Times MLC 2006 Regulation 4.4 Access to shore-based welfare facilities for seafarers. Times purpose: to ensure that seafarers working on board a ship have access to shore-based facilities and services to secure their health and well-being. Times the Convention encourages the establishment of port-based welfare facilities. They should be easily accessible to you regardless of your nationality, race, color, sex, religion, political opinion, social class, and the flag of your ship. Ideally, they should include meeting and recreation rooms and facilities for sport, education, religious needs, and personal counseling. Times in the interests of your health and well-being, every effort should be made by the people responsible in port and on board your ship to allow you to take shore leave as soon as possible after arrival in port. Times you should be informed of the facilities available to you and be advised of any local laws or customs that, if broken, could endanger your freedom. Times there should be welfare boards to make sure that the welfare services provided are adequate. Times in case you get into difficulty in a foreign port, you should have access to your consul, if there is one, and there should be good cooperation between your consulate and the local authorities. Times if you are detained, your case should be dealt with promptly and lawfully. You can seek assistance and protection either from the country of your nationality or from the flag state of your vessel, so you should make sure both are immediately informed if you are detained abroad. Times MLC 2006 Regulation 4.5 Social Security Protection for Seafarers. Times purpose: to ensure that measures are taken with a view to providing seafarers with access to social security protection. Times you and your dependents have a right to have access to social security protection. Times in some countries social security is provided by the state through taxation. In other countries it is a matter for private individuals to take out personal insurance or to make arrangements through a company scheme. Times as a seafarer you may come under the law of your home country or that of the flag state. Either way, the provisions should be no worse than for a shore-based worker in that state. Times the Convention aims to encourage wider social security protection for seafarers. States signing up to the Convention have to provide at least 3 from the above list. The recommended areas are medical care, sickness benefit, and employment injury benefit. Times normally this should be done by the authorities in the country where you live, but it may be arranged through agreement with the flag state or through your employer or union. You may have to contribute financially to the scheme. The point is that you should not be worse off, in terms of social security, on account of choosing a career at sea. Times in the event of any dispute over social security provisions, there has to be a fair and effective settlement procedure. Times where the shipowner has responsibilities for making social security payments your rights under the Maritime Labour Convention on your behalf, the flag state must ensure compliance. Times MLC 2006 Regulation 5.1, Flag State Responsibilities. Times Purpose, to ensure that each member implements its responsibilities under this convention with respect to ships that fly its flag. Times Declaration of Maritime Labour Compliance, DMLC Part I lists the way in which the flag state's regulation complies with the convention, and Part II is drawn up by the shipowner to show how the vessel is compliant with Part I. The DMLC must be certified by an authorized representative of the flag state or a recognized organization. Times Maritime Labor Certificate, each ship over 500 GT, operating in international waters or between ports of different countries, has to have a maritime labor certificate issued either by the flag state or by the recognized organization. The certificate can be valid for a period of no more than 5 years. Times certificates and related documents, the results of inspections, including deficiencies and actions taken to resolve them, have to be noted with the date and kept on board. Times non-validity of the certificate, a maritime labor certificate ceases to be valid when inspections are not carried out within the specified period of time, the certificate is not endorsed by the flag state or by its recognized organization, ship changes flag, ship changes owner, substantial changes have been made to the structure or equipment of the vessel. Times the flag state has to operate an effective system for inspecting working and living conditions on board ships flying its flag. Times flag state inspectors have to be independent with no vested interests that could interfere with their duties. Times on-board complaint procedures, there must be a procedure in place on board your ship enabling you to make a complaint about breaches of the convention and your rights, including the right to live and work in decent conditions. Times MLC 2006 Regulation 5.2, Port State Responsibilities. Times Purpose, to enable each member to implement its responsibilities under this convention regarding international cooperation in the implementation and enforcement of the convention standards on foreign ships. Times a port state control inspector will go on board and just check that the Maritime Labour Certificate and the Declaration of Maritime Labour Compliance are in order. A more detailed inspection can be carried out under the following circumstances. Times the documents are not produced, are invalid or have been falsified. Times the inspector has grounds for believing that the working and living conditions are substandard in terms of the convention. Times the ship has changed flag in an attempt to avoid compliance with the convention. Times a specific complaint has been made about the working living conditions on board by a seafarer, a trade union, or any person with an interest in the safety and health of seafarers and their ship. Times when deficiencies are found, the inspector should bring them to the attention of the master and give him/her a deadline to fix them. If the conditions on board are found to be hazardous to your safety, health or security, or there has been a serious or repeated breach of the convention requirements, the ship can be detained until the problems have been rectified. Times seafarers and shipowners organizations have to be informed of significant complaints or deficiencies found in the course of inspections in port. Times Regulation 5.3, Labor Supplying Responsibilities. Times Purpose, to ensure that each member implements its responsibilities under this convention as pertaining to seafarer recruitment and placement and the social protection of its seafarers. Times without prejudice to the principle of each member's responsibility for the working and living conditions of seafarers on ships that fly its flag. The member also has a responsibility to ensure the implementation of the requirements of this convention regarding the recruitment and placement of seafarers as well as the social security protection of seafarers that are its nationals or are resident or are otherwise domiciled in its territory, to the extent that such responsibility is provided for in this convention. Times detailed requirements for the implementation of paragraph 1 of this regulation are found in the Code. Times each member shall establish an effective inspection and monitoring system for enforcing its labor supplying responsibilities under this convention. Times 4. Information about the system referred to in paragraph 3 of this regulation, including the method used for assessing its effectiveness, shall be included in the members' reports pursuant to Article 22 of the Constitution. Times MLC certificate complemented by DMLC compliance shall constitute prima facie evidence that ship has been clearly inspected by member whose flag flies. Times declaration of maritime labor compliance. Times DMLC Part 1. Times form is prepared by competent authority and filled by visiting surveyor. Times detailed inspection is carried out on. Times minimum age. Times medical certificate. Times qualification of seafarer. Times seafarer employment agreement. Times hour of rest and work. Times manning level. Times accommodation. Times recreational facilities. Times food and catering. Times health facility and accident protection. Times medical care. Times on-board complaint procedure. Times payment of wages. Times use of incinerator certified. Times recruitment and placement service. Times DMLC Part 2. Times form to be filled by ship owner. Times surveyor should check whether it is genuine when the first inspection is over. Times if outlines the need the ship owner must do as per national requirement. Times it shows measures taken to ensure that improvement continues. Times it must be written in clear terms. Times it is designed to help everyone involved to easily check that requirements are being put in properly. Times certificate under MLC. Times International Maritime Labour Certificate, validity 5 years. Times subjected to intermediate inspection between 2 ND and 3rd anniversary. Times interim MLC, 6 month, for new ship flag change. Times DMLC Part 1 should kept along with MLC certificate. Times in India MLC RAT. Thank you guys, please subscribe and support my channel.